Every morning, millions of people wake to the same sunrise. The sky gradually shifts from darkness to light. Birds begin their familiar songs. Streets slowly fill with movement. Somewhere, a baker prepares fresh bread while a student opens a book before school. A nurse finishes a long night shift as another worker begins an ordinary commute. The world itself has not changed. Yet no two people experience that same morning in exactly the same way. One person steps outside believing today may bring something meaningful. Another quietly expects disappointment before the day has even begun. One notices opportunity. The other notices obstacles. One sees possibilities waiting to unfold. The other sees reasons not to try. What creates such different experiences of the very same world? Many people assume the answer is luck. Some believe it is personality. Others think optimism belongs only to people whose lives have been unusually easy. But psychology tells us something both simpler and more encouraging. The greatest difference is often not what happens to us. It is the meaning our minds assign to what happens. This invisible process begins long before we are aware of it. Every experience we have ever lived, every success, every disappointment, every encouraging word, every painful memory, quietly shapes the lens through which we interpret the present. That lens influences what we expect from tomorrow. It determines whether uncertainty feels like possibility or danger. It whispers explanations before facts have fully arrived. Without realizing it, each of us spends our lives telling ourselves stories. Not stories written in books. Stories about ourselves. Stories about other people. Stories about the future. I always fail interviews. People never appreciate my work. Nothing good lasts. I'm probably too old. It's already too late. Or perhaps this setback is temporary. I haven't learned this yet. There may be another opportunity. I've survived difficult seasons before. My future hasn't been written. These quiet inner narratives rarely announce themselves. They simply become the background music of our thinking. Eventually, we mistake them for reality. That is why two people can experience exactly the same event and walk away believing entirely different things. Imagine two friends who both apply for an important promotion. Neither receives it. The first quietly concludes, "I'm simply not good enough." The second thinks, "I clearly have something to improve." The disappointment is identical. The emotional pain is similar. Yet the direction of their lives immediately begins to separate. One interpretation closes doors. The other leaves them open. This difference is the foundation of optimism, not endless positivity, not pretending life is easy, not forcing happiness during difficult times. Real optimism is something much quieter. It is the habit of leaving room for a future that has not yet revealed itself. Perhaps you've experienced something similar. Maybe there was a period when you believed an ending had arrived. The end of a relationship, the loss of a career opportunity, a financial setback, an illness, a personal failure that seemed impossible to recover from. At the time, your mind confidently predicted what would happen next. It imagined months or years of disappointment. It quietly convinced you that life would never feel quite the same again. Yet if you look back today, you may notice something surprising. Life continued writing chapters you never expected. New friendships appeared. Unexpected opportunities arrived. Strength quietly developed where uncertainty once lived. The future ignored your predictions. There is a quiet lesson hidden here. Our minds are remarkably skilled at imagining tomorrow. They are remarkably poor at predicting it. That single truth sits at the heart of optimism, not certainty, possibility, and possibility is far more powerful than many people realize. Over the next journey together, we will explore why the human mind naturally expects danger before opportunity. Why some people recover from enormous setbacks, while others remain trapped by smaller disappointments. Why hope can be strengthened like a muscle, and why optimism is less a personality trait than a daily psychological practice. Along the way, we'll meet ordinary people facing familiar struggles, discover surprising lessons from history, science, and everyday life, and perhaps recognize small pieces of our own stories reflected in theirs. Because optimism is not reserved for extraordinary people. It is built quietly by ordinary people making ordinary choices, one thought at a time. The brain was built to notice danger before opportunity. If optimism feels difficult, there is a reason. It is not because something is wrong with you. It is because your brain is doing exactly what millions of years of evolution taught it to do. Long before cities existed, before books, businesses, or modern medicine, survival depended upon noticing danger quickly. Imagine an early human walking through a dense forest. The leaves suddenly rustle nearby. There are two possible explanations. Perhaps it is only the wind, or perhaps a predator waits unseen. The person who assumed everything was safe might not survive long enough to discover the truth. The cautious person, the one whose brain instinctively imagined danger, was far more likely to stay alive. Generation after generation, this tendency became deeply woven into human psychology. Today, most of us no longer face wild predators. Yet our brains continue using the same operating system. Instead of lions, we fear rejection. Instead of poisonous snakes, we fear failure. Instead of harsh winters, we fear uncertainty. The survival system remains the same. Only the threats have changed. Psychologists often refer to this as the negativity bias. Negative experiences naturally capture our attention more strongly than positive ones. A single criticism can outweigh 10 compliments. One disappointing meeting can overshadow an entire productive week. A single unexpected expense can erase the satisfaction of months of careful saving. Our minds remember emotional pain because, historically, remembering danger increased the chances of survival. Understanding this changes something important. It reminds us that pessimistic thoughts are not always accurate. They are often automatic. There is a meaningful difference between those two ideas. Automatic thoughts arrive without permission. Accurate thoughts deserve examination. Many people confuse the first for the second. Consider a young architect named Elena. After spending weeks preparing a proposal for an important client, she received an email thanking her for the effort, but explaining that another firm had been selected. Her immediate thought arrived almost instantly. I'm simply not talented enough. For several hours, that conclusion felt completely true. Then, later that evening, she reread the feedback more carefully. The client praised her creativity. They admired her technical approach. The deciding factor had been cost. Another company had simply offered a significantly lower price. Nothing in the email suggested she lacked ability. Yet her mind had immediately written that story. Not because it was true, because the brain naturally searches for danger before possibility. Perhaps you've experienced something similar. Maybe someone failed to reply to a message. Your mind quietly imagined they were upset. Later, you discovered they had simply been busy. Maybe a meeting ended awkwardly. You spent hours replaying every sentence. The next morning, everyone else had already forgotten it. Our minds often fill empty spaces with fearful explanations. Optimism begins when we gently question those explanations, instead of immediately believing them. There is a quiet freedom in realizing that not every thought deserves our trust. Some thoughts are warnings. Some are memories. Some are habits, and some are simply echoes from an ancient survival system trying to protect us in a world very different from the one it was designed for. Once we understand that, something remarkable begins to happen. We stop asking, "Why am I thinking this?" And we begin asking, "Is this thought helping me see reality, or only my fear?" That simple question becomes the first true step toward an optimistic mind. Seeing possibility without ignoring reality. There is a common misunderstanding about optimism that quietly prevents many people from embracing it. Some imagine an optimist as someone who refuses to acknowledge problems. Someone who smiles through every setback, insists that everything happens for a reason, and believes success is guaranteed if they simply think positively enough. Real life rarely works that way. The most optimistic people are often those who have experienced some of life's deepest disappointments. They have known rejection. They have lived through uncertainty. They have carried grief, failure, financial hardship, or broken dreams. Yet they continue moving forward. Not because they deny reality, but because they refuse to let reality become the whole story. Imagine standing before a large mountain on a cloudy morning. The summit is hidden. The path ahead disappears into the mist. You cannot see what lies around the next corner. One traveler turns back immediately. The mountain is impossible, they conclude. Another traveler takes a slow step forward. I can't see the whole path, they admit, but I can see the next few meters. Neither traveler knows what waits beyond the clouds. The difference is not information, it is interpretation. Optimism does not require seeing the entire journey. It simply requires believing that the unseen portion may still be worth walking toward. This way of thinking appears repeatedly throughout psychology. Researchers have found that people who approach challenges with realistic optimism are generally more persistent when difficulties arise. They are more willing to adapt their strategies after failure. Instead of viewing setbacks as permanent evidence of personal inadequacy, they see them as information, something to learn from rather than something to be defined by. That distinction seems small. In practice, it changes entire lives. Consider a violin maker named Samuel. For more than 20 years, he crafted instruments by hand in a small workshop inherited from his grandfather. His violins were known throughout the region for their beautiful sound, but demand gradually declined as inexpensive factory-made instruments became widely available. Month after month, fewer customers arrived. Bills accumulated. Friends encouraged him to close the workshop and find a more secure job. For several weeks, Samuel seriously considered giving up. He wasn't ignoring reality. The numbers were clear. His business could not continue in the same way. Then, one afternoon, while repairing an old violin for a teenage music student, he noticed something unexpected. The student wasn't simply grateful for the repair. She was fascinated by the process itself. She asked questions about the wood, the varnish, the shape of the instrument, and how tiny adjustments changed the sound. A few days later, another young musician showed the same curiosity. Samuel began wondering whether people still valued craftsmanship. Perhaps they simply no longer understood it. Instead of closing the workshop, he transformed part of it into a small learning studio. He offered weekend classes for students, amateur musicians, and parents interested in traditional instrument making. Those classes gradually became more successful than the business he thought he had lost. Years later, Samuel often reflected on that difficult season. The workshop didn't survive, he would say with a gentle smile. It became something better. That sentence contains a profound psychological truth. Optimism is rarely about protecting the old. Often, it is about becoming open to the new. Many of us unknowingly cling to a single vision of how life should unfold. We imagine the perfect career, the perfect relationship, the perfect timeline, the perfect destination. When reality takes a different direction, we interpret the change as failure. But sometimes life isn't ending a story. Sometimes it is editing one. Perhaps you have experienced something similar. Maybe there was a goal you desperately wanted to achieve. At the time, not reaching it felt devastating. Months or years later, you discovered that disappointment quietly guided you towards something that suited you even better. Perhaps a job rejection led to a healthier workplace. Perhaps a canceled plan introduced you to people who changed your life. Perhaps a closed door prevented you from entering a room that would never have allowed you to grow. None of this means every disappointment carries a hidden blessing. Some losses remain painful. Some questions remain unanswered. Optimism does not erase grief. It simply leaves room beside grief for possibility. The human mind often treats today's circumstances as permanent. Psychologists call this the tendency to overestimate the duration of our emotional states. When we are discouraged, we imagine discouragement lasting forever. When we are anxious, we struggle to imagine peace returning. Yet history, both personal and collective, tells a different story. Human beings adapt remarkably well. Not perfectly, not quickly, but consistently. That ability to adapt is one of optimism's greatest allies, because hope does not depend on knowing what tomorrow will bring. It depends on trusting that we will continue growing as tomorrow arrives. The stories we tell ourselves become the future we expect. If someone asked you to describe yourself in a few sentences, what would you say? Would you begin with your profession, your family, your achievements, your disappointments? Most people believe they answer this question objectively, but in reality, they answer it through narrative. Human beings are natural storytellers. Long before we wrote books, we explained our lives through stories shared around fires, across dinner tables, and eventually within our own minds. The most influential storyteller you will ever encounter is not an author. It is your own inner voice. Every day it quietly explains your experiences. You embarrassed yourself. You handled that well. Nobody noticed. They probably judged you. You'll never learn. You're getting better. Most of these sentences pass through our minds so quickly that we hardly notice them. Yet over months and years, they accumulate into identity. Identity shapes expectation. Expectation influences behavior. Behavior creates results. Results reinforce identity. The cycle quietly continues. Imagine a child learning to ride a bicycle. After falling several times, one child says, "I haven't learned yet." Another says, "I'm just bad at this." The scraped knees are identical. The difference lies entirely in interpretation. One story invites another attempt. The other quietly closes the door. Adults continue doing exactly the same thing. Only the bicycles become careers, relationships, businesses, health, parenting, or personal dreams. There is an interesting example from the world of athletics. Elite coaches often notice that two competitors with nearly identical physical abilities can produce dramatically different performances under pressure. One interprets nervousness as proof they are unprepared. The other interprets the very same racing heartbeat as evidence that their body is getting ready to perform. The physical sensations are almost identical. The meaning assigned to them changes everything. This is one reason optimism is so powerful. It changes not only how we remember the past, it changes how we approach the future. The person who expects growth behaves differently from someone who expects defeat. They ask different questions. They notice different opportunities. They recover differently after mistakes. Slowly, their expectations begin shaping their experiences. Not through magic, through behavior. Perhaps there is a quiet lesson hidden here. Your future is influenced not only by the events that happen to you, but by the story you choose to tell about those events. That story is not fixed. It can be revised, not by pretending painful chapters never happened, but by deciding they are chapters, rather than the ending. There may have been moments in your own life that seem to define everything: a failure, a loss, a decision you wish you could undo. At the time, it may have felt as though your entire identity had become wrapped around that single event. Yet human lives are wonderfully resistant to simple definitions. One difficult year does not define an entire lifetime. One mistake does not reveal the whole person. One disappointment cannot predict every tomorrow. Optimism begins to grow when we stop asking, "What does this event say about me?" and begin asking, "What can this experience teach me about becoming the person I wish to be?" That small shift may appear insignificant, but over years, it quietly transforms the direction of a life. Because the stories we repeat most often eventually become the future we believe is possible. Hope begins moving long before confidence arrives. There is another quiet misconception that prevents many people from moving forward. It is the belief that confidence must come first. Many of us wait for the perfect moment before making an important decision. We wait until we feel certain. We wait until fear disappears. We wait until we are completely ready. Yet if you speak with people who have started successful businesses, changed careers later in life, rebuilt relationships, recovered from illness, or learned entirely new skills, you will hear a remarkably similar story. Very few of them began with certainty. Most began with hesitation. The difference was not the absence of fear. It was the presence of action. Psychologists have long observed something fascinating about human behavior. We often imagine that our thoughts create our actions. While that is certainly true, the opposite is equally powerful. Our actions also reshape our thoughts. A person who believes they cannot become healthier may still decide to take a short walk. That walk creates a small success. The success creates evidence. The evidence slowly changes belief. The new belief encourages another action. Before long, a completely different identity begins to emerge. The transformation did not begin with confidence, it began with movement. Optimism works in much the same way. Many people assume optimistic people wake each morning feeling hopeful. In reality, hope often grows because they continue taking small steps even when certainty is absent. Imagine standing beside a frozen lake at sunrise. The surface appears solid. The air is still. Nothing seems to be changing, yet beneath the ice, the water continues moving. Life continues quietly preparing for spring. Growth often begins long before it becomes visible. Human progress is surprisingly similar. The smallest decisions rarely look important while we are making them. Reading 10 pages of a book, making one phone call, applying for one position, learning one new skill, saving a small amount of money, apologizing after an argument, taking a short walk after weeks of inactivity. Individually, these actions appear almost insignificant. Collectively, they begin reshaping an entire future. There is something deeply reassuring about this. Optimism does not demand giant leaps. It asks only for the next meaningful step. Perhaps you've experienced this yourself. Maybe there was a task you postponed for weeks because it seemed overwhelming. The moment you finally began, something unexpected happened. The task itself did not become easier overnight, but the fear surrounding it quietly became smaller. Action has a remarkable ability to reduce uncertainty. Not because it answers every question, because it reminds us that we are capable of influencing our circumstances. That realization restores something many people lose during difficult seasons: a sense of agency. Agency is the quiet belief that our choices still matter. When people feel powerless, optimism fades. When they rediscover even a small measure of influence over their lives, hope begins returning almost naturally. This explains why people often feel better after taking a practical step, even if the larger problem remains unsolved. The step itself becomes evidence that they are no longer standing still. The bridge that was built, one stone at a time. History offers countless examples of extraordinary achievements. Yet what makes them inspiring is rarely the final accomplishment. It is the ordinary persistence that came before it. In the 19th century, the construction of the Brooklyn Bridge was considered almost impossible. The engineering challenges were unlike anything attempted before. Workers faced dangerous conditions beneath the river. Accidents occurred. Progress was painfully slow. At one point, one of the chief engineers became so seriously ill that many believed the project would never be completed. From the outside, it appeared that the dream had reached its end, but the work continued. Not through dramatic speeches or unrealistic optimism, through thousands of small decisions made day after day. Plans were revised, problems were solved one at a time, stone by stone, cable by cable. Eventually, what had once seemed impossible became one of the world's most recognizable landmarks. The bridge did not appear because someone believed hard enough. It appeared because belief was paired with consistent action. This pattern repeats throughout history. Scientific discoveries, medical breakthroughs, works of art, space exploration, social change. Behind nearly every remarkable achievement lies a long period during which success was invisible. Progress often hides itself while it is happening. This is one reason optimism requires patience. We naturally want immediate evidence that our efforts are working. Life rarely provides it. A tree spends years strengthening its roots before anyone admires its height. A musician practices thousands of unseen hours before performing confidently on stage. A language learner struggles through awkward conversations long before speaking fluently. Growth prefers gradual rhythms. Our modern world often celebrates results while overlooking the quiet persistence that produced them. Perhaps that is why so many people underestimate their own progress. They compare their beginning with someone else's middle. They judge today's effort against tomorrow's destination. They mistake slow improvement for failure. There is a quiet lesson hidden here. Not all progress announces itself. Some of the most important changes happen beneath the surface. Your thinking becomes calmer. Your reactions become wiser. Your patience becomes deeper. Your resilience becomes stronger. None of these transformations can be measured as easily as a salary increase or a certificate hanging on a wall. Yet they quietly prepare you for opportunities that have not yet arrived. Perhaps you have experienced seasons when nothing seemed to be changing. You continued showing up, continued learning, continued trying, continued believing, even when visible results were scarce. Then one day, what looked like sudden success appeared. Other people noticed only the outcome. They did not see the hundreds of quiet decisions that made it possible. Optimism understands something many people forget. The invisible work often matters more than the visible reward. It teaches us to trust the process even when the destination remains hidden beyond the horizon. Because hope is not sustained by dramatic moments alone. It is sustained by the quiet confidence that today's small effort is becoming tomorrow's unseen foundation. And perhaps that is one of optimism's greatest gifts. It allows us to value the journey long before we arrive at the destination. What we notice becomes the world we believe we live in. Imagine standing in the middle of a busy city square. Hundreds of things are happening at once. A child laughs as pigeons scatter into the air. A street musician begins playing a familiar melody. A cyclist narrowly avoids a pedestrian. Someone receives wonderful news over the phone while, only a few meters away, another person quietly wipes away tears after reading a difficult message. The same place, the same moment, completely different experiences. Our minds are surrounded by far more information than they can ever consciously process. Every second, our senses collect an enormous amount of detail: sounds, colors, conversations, expressions, movements, smells, and emotions. If we paid attention to everything, we would quickly become overwhelmed. So the brain performs an extraordinary task. It filters. Without asking for our permission, it decides what deserves our attention and what can safely remain in the background. This filtering system is one of the most remarkable features of human psychology. It allows us to focus, but it also shapes the reality we believe we are living in. Think about the last time you decided to buy a particular model of car. Perhaps before making that decision, you hardly noticed that vehicle on the road. Then suddenly, it seemed to appear everywhere. The number of cars hadn't changed. Your attention had. The same principle quietly influences the way we experience life. Someone who has become convinced that people cannot be trusted will notice every broken promise, every dishonest conversation, every disappointing interaction. Acts of kindness may still happen around them, but those moments receive far less attention. Another person who believes that most people are fundamentally decent will notice generosity more easily. They will remember the stranger who held the door open, the neighbor who offered help without being asked, the colleague who stayed late to support the team. Neither person is completely wrong. Neither sees the whole picture. Both are collecting evidence that supports what they already expect. Psychologists sometimes describe this as confirmation bias, our natural tendency to seek, remember, and give greater weight to information that confirms our existing beliefs. It is not a flaw unique to pessimistic people. Optimistic people experience it too. The difference lies in the beliefs they reinforce. Healthy optimism does not ignore life's difficulties. Instead, it refuses to allow those difficulties to become the only evidence considered. Imagine reading a book while covering half the pages with your hand. You would understand parts of the story, but not all of it. That is what happens when our attention becomes trapped by fear. We begin reading only one version of reality. Perhaps you've experienced this after a particularly difficult season. Maybe one disappointment made you expect another. Soon, every inconvenience seemed connected. A delayed reply felt like rejection. A small mistake felt like proof of failure. A minor setback appeared to confirm that nothing was improving. The world itself had not become darker. Your attention had quietly narrowed. The encouraging truth is that attention can also be trained. Just as athletes strengthen muscles through repeated practice, we strengthen attention by repeatedly choosing where it rests. This is one reason gratitude has fascinated psychologists for decades. Gratitude is often misunderstood as simply saying thank you. In reality, it is an exercise in attention. It gently teaches the brain to notice resources before limitations, support before isolation, progress before perfection, possibility before defeat. That does not mean pretending painful experiences do not exist. It means refusing to overlook the quiet blessings that continue existing alongside them. There is a quiet lesson hidden here. The quality of our lives is influenced not only by what happens to us, but by what we consistently notice. Optimism begins to grow when we widen our field of vision, when we learn to see both the challenge and the opportunity standing beside it. The quiet power of gratitude. Several years ago, a community library in a small town began hosting weekly gatherings for retirees. The purpose was simple. People would meet for tea, conversation, and the occasional guest speaker. At first, attendance was modest. Many participants arrived carrying invisible burdens. Some had recently lost lifelong partners. Others struggled with declining health. Several admitted they felt increasingly disconnected from the world around them. One volunteer suggested ending each meeting with a simple question. What is one thing that brought you joy this week? The group hesitated. The question felt almost uncomfortable. One woman quietly answered, "My granddaughter called." Another smiled and said, "I finally finished repairing an old chair." Someone else laughed. "I managed to keep my tomato plants alive." The answers seemed ordinary, almost insignificant. Yet week after week, something began changing. People arrived already thinking about their answer. During the week, they found themselves noticing moments they previously would have overlooked. The morning sunlight through the kitchen window, a friendly conversation at the supermarket, the satisfaction of finishing a puzzle, the smell of fresh rain after a hot afternoon. Nothing extraordinary had happened. Life remained imperfect. Health challenges remained. Financial worries did not disappear. Loneliness did not vanish overnight. What changed was attention. Months later, several participants described feeling lighter. Not because life had become easier, because they had stopped allowing hardship to occupy every corner of their awareness. This reflects an important psychological principle. The brain becomes more efficient at whatever it repeatedly practices. If we repeatedly search for problems, the brain becomes exceptionally skilled at finding them. If we repeatedly notice moments of meaning, kindness, progress, and beauty, those pathways gradually become stronger as well. Gratitude is not denial. It is balance. It reminds us that life can contain sorrow and beauty simultaneously. A rainy day may still produce a magnificent rainbow. A difficult year may still include unforgettable conversations. A painful goodbye may exist alongside deep love. Optimism grows naturally in people who learn to hold both realities together. Perhaps there was a time when you experienced this without giving it a name. Maybe you faced one of the most challenging periods of your life. And yet, when you look back now, you remember the friend who refused to leave your side, the doctor who offered reassurance, the neighbor who quietly helped without expecting recognition, the stranger whose small kindness arrived exactly when you needed it. These memories do not erase the hardship. They simply remind us that goodness continued existing within it. This perspective appears throughout history. Communities rebuilding after natural disasters often speak not only about destruction, but about the remarkable generosity that followed. People opened their homes, shared food, volunteered their time, supported complete strangers. The disaster revealed suffering. It also revealed compassion. Which story is more true? Both. Optimism chooses not to ignore either one, because hope does not require a perfect world. It simply requires enough light to continue taking the next step. As we continue this journey, another question naturally begins to emerge. If our attention shapes our outlook, what else quietly influences the way we think? The answer may be closer than we imagine. It lives in the conversations we have, the people we spend time with, the environments we enter each day, because optimism, like emotion itself, has a remarkable tendency to spread from one person to another. The invisible influence of the people around us. There is an old saying that emotions are contagious. Long before psychologists began studying human behavior in laboratories, people had already noticed something curious about everyday life. Spend enough time with someone who laughs easily, and your own smile arrives a little sooner. Spend enough time with someone who constantly expects disappointment, and before long you may find yourself anticipating problems that never truly existed. Human beings are remarkably social creatures. Even when we believe we are thinking independently, our minds are constantly responding to the attitudes, beliefs, and emotional patterns of those around us. Consider how quickly the atmosphere changes when one anxious person enters a meeting. Without intending to, they may speak hurriedly, focus on everything that could go wrong, and interpret uncertainty as a warning sign. Soon, others begin asking more cautious questions. Conversations become more defensive. The room feels heavier. Now imagine the opposite. A calm leader acknowledges the same challenges without dismissing them. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to us?" they ask, "What options do we still have?" Nothing about the situation has changed, yet the emotional climate has. Hope often begins with the language people choose to use. Psychologists have observed this phenomenon in families, workplaces, classrooms, and communities. The expectations of one person often influence the performance and confidence of another. Children who repeatedly hear, "You'll figure it out," frequently approach challenges differently from children who constantly hear, "Be careful, you'll probably fail." Employees who feel trusted usually become more willing to solve difficult problems. Teams led by hopeful leaders often recover more quickly after setbacks, because their attention remains focused on solutions rather than blame. This is not because optimism magically changes reality. It changes behavior, and behavior gradually changes outcomes. Perhaps you've noticed this in your own life. Think about a conversation after which you felt unusually hopeful. Maybe the other person did not offer perfect advice. Perhaps they simply listened. Perhaps they reminded you of strengths you had temporarily forgotten. Perhaps they believed in your ability to recover before you believed it yourself. That quiet confidence became something you borrowed until you could carry it on your own. There is a beautiful truth hidden inside many meaningful relationships. Sometimes another person's hope carries us until we are strong enough to carry our own. The reverse is also true. If every conversation revolves around fear, criticism, and hopeless predictions, our own thinking gradually begins to reflect those patterns, not because we are weak, because our brains are designed to learn from the people around us. Imagine planting two identical trees. One grows in rich soil with steady sunlight and regular care. The other grows where the ground is rocky and little water reaches its roots. The seed is not the only factor determining growth. The environment matters. Human optimism grows in much the same way. Our emotional environment quietly shapes the way hope develops. This does not mean we should avoid everyone who is struggling. Life requires compassion. Some of the wisest people carry deep sadness while still offering extraordinary kindness. The difference lies not in whether someone experiences difficulty, but in how they respond to it. Do they remain open to growth? Do they believe change is possible? Do they encourage resilience, or do they insist that improvement is impossible? Those attitudes slowly become part of the emotional atmosphere we breathe each day. Perhaps there is a quiet lesson hidden here. Protecting your optimism is not an act of selfishness, it is an act of stewardship. Because the hope you preserve within yourself may one day become the hope someone else desperately needs. Resilience is not the absence of pain. One of the greatest myths surrounding optimism is the belief that optimistic people suffer less. They don't. They experience heartbreak. They lose loved ones. They face illness. They encounter failure. They question themselves. They have moments when the future feels uncertain. The difference is not the amount of pain they experience. It is the relationship they develop with that pain. Imagine two sailors caught in the same violent storm. Neither can stop the wind, neither can calm the waves. Yet one has spent years learning how to adjust the sails, read the currents, and remain steady under pressure. The storm is identical. Their preparation is not. Life works in much the same way. Resilience is not built during peaceful seasons. It is revealed during difficult ones. Psychologists often describe resilience as the ability to recover, adapt, and continue moving forward after adversity. Notice what that definition does not include. It does not say, avoid adversity. It does not promise immediate recovery. It simply describes the ability to begin again, and again. Perhaps this is why optimism and resilience are so closely connected. Optimism quietly whispers, "This is difficult." Resilience answers, "Then we'll keep going." One provides direction, the other provides endurance. History offers countless examples of this partnership. When Thomas Edison conducted thousands of experiments while searching for a practical electric light, many attempts failed. Each unsuccessful experiment could have been interpreted as proof that success was impossible. Instead, each became information, another step toward understanding what would eventually work. Whether in science, medicine, engineering, or art, progress has rarely followed a straight line. Discovery often emerges through repeated adjustment. The same is true in ordinary lives. A parent learning to raise a child, a student preparing for examinations, someone rebuilding after financial hardship, a person recovering from illness. None of these journeys move steadily upward. There are setbacks, unexpected detours, days when motivation disappears, moments when giving up seems easier than continuing. Perhaps you've known days like these, days when even getting out of bed required quiet courage, days when one small task felt larger than a mountain. During such moments, optimism does not ask us to pretend everything is wonderful. Instead, it asks a gentler question. What is still possible today? Maybe today all you can do is make one phone call, take one short walk, read one page, prepare one healthy meal, offer one sincere apology. Rest so tomorrow becomes possible. Small actions should never be underestimated. A river carves through stone not because of one powerful surge, but because of countless drops flowing in the same direction. Human resilience grows in a remarkably similar way. One choice, then another, until one day we look back and realize we have traveled much farther than we believed possible. There is another important truth worth remembering. Resilience does not mean carrying every burden alone. Some of the strongest people are those who ask for help when they need it. Psychological research consistently shows that supportive relationships are among the greatest predictors of resilience. Hope grows more easily when it is shared. A conversation, a mentor, a trusted friend, a loving family member, a supportive community. These connections remind us that strength is not measured by isolation. It is strengthened through belonging. Perhaps there is a quiet lesson hidden here. Optimism is not believing that storms will never come. It is trusting that storms do not last forever. And resilience is learning that even when the sky grows dark, the sunrise has never forgotten how to return. Why failure often teaches more than success. If there is one experience that most people try to avoid, it is failure. The word itself carries a surprising emotional weight. We rarely use it to describe a single event. Instead, we quietly allow it to describe ourselves. We don't simply think, the project failed. We begin thinking, I failed. That subtle change may seem insignificant, but psychologically it changes everything. Events are temporary. Identity feels permanent. When failure becomes part of our identity, optimism begins to disappear, not because opportunities no longer exist, but because we stop believing we are capable of recognizing them. Yet history tells a remarkably different story. Nearly every meaningful achievement has been shaped by moments that, at the time, looked remarkably similar to failure. An inventor spends years refining an idea that refuses to work. A writer receives countless rejection letters before finding a publisher. An athlete misses opportunities that seem impossible to recover from. A scientist follows one unsuccessful experiment after another before making a discovery that changes the course of medicine. Looking backward, we admire their perseverance. Living through those moments, however, must have felt far less inspiring. That is one of optimism's greatest challenges. It asks us to trust that today's unfinished story may look entirely different when viewed from tomorrow. Psychologists often speak about the difference between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. Although the terms are simple, the idea behind them is profound. A fixed mindset quietly assumes that ability is largely permanent. Mistakes become evidence of limitation. Challenges become threats to identity. Growth slows because protecting the image of being capable becomes more important than becoming more capable. A growth mindset approaches the very same experiences differently. Mistakes become information. Feedback becomes guidance. Difficulty becomes part of the learning process, rather than proof that learning is impossible. Optimism flourishes in this kind of thinking because the future remains open. There is always another lesson, another attempt, another opportunity to improve. Imagine a potter sitting before a spinning wheel. The first bowl collapses. The second leans awkwardly to one side. The third develops a crack while drying. An observer might focus only on the ruined clay. The potter sees something entirely different. Each attempt reveals what pressure to apply, how much water is needed, when patience matters more than speed. The failed bowls never reach someone's dining table, but they quietly contribute to the bowl that eventually will. Life often unfolds in the same way. Experiences that never become visible to others frequently become the foundation for future success. Perhaps you have experienced this yourself. Maybe there was an interview that ended in disappointment. At the time, it felt like a closed door. Yet while preparing for the next opportunity, you became more confident, more knowledgeable, and more aware of your strengths. The first interview did not give you the position. It gave you the preparation that eventually made the second one possible. The outcome mattered. But the growth mattered even more. There is a quiet lesson hidden here. Failure does not always move us away from our destination. Sometimes it quietly changes the person who will eventually arrive there. Optimism allows us to see that distinction. Instead of asking, "Why did this happen to me?" it gently invites another question. What is this experience preparing me to become? That question does not erase disappointment. It gives disappointment a purpose, and purpose has a remarkable ability to transform suffering into growth. The courage to begin again. There is something deeply admirable about beginnings. Not dramatic beginnings filled with celebration and applause, the quieter ones, the kind that happen after life has already disappointed us. Beginning again after losing a job. Beginning again after a business closes. beginning again after a relationship ends, beginning again after illness changes our plans, beginning again after confidence has quietly slipped away. These beginnings often go unnoticed by everyone except the person living them. Yet they may require more courage than any public achievement. Society celebrates arrivals, graduations, promotions, awards, milestones. Rarely do we celebrate the invisible mornings when someone chooses to start over. The morning someone updates a resume after months of discouragement. The afternoon someone returns to the gym after recovering from surgery. The evening someone opens a textbook years after believing they were too old to study again. These moments rarely make headlines, yet they reveal something extraordinary about the human spirit. Psychologists sometimes describe hope as future-oriented thinking. It is the ability to imagine that tomorrow can be meaningfully different from today. Without that ability, action becomes increasingly difficult. Why prepare for a future you no longer believe in? Why learn something new if growth seems impossible? Why invest effort if disappointment feels inevitable? Optimism quietly restores that missing future. Not by guaranteeing success, by making success imaginable again. History offers countless examples of people who achieved remarkable things after most observers believed their best years were behind them. Some artists produced their greatest work later in life. Many entrepreneurs built successful businesses after previous ventures failed. Scientists continued researching long after early experiments produced discouraging results. Their stories share a common pattern. They refused to believe that one chapter had the authority to define the entire book. Perhaps there is a reason these stories continue inspiring us. They remind us of something we already know deep within ourselves. Human beings are wonderfully unfinished. We continue learning, changing, adapting, growing, long after we imagine our identities have become fixed. Perhaps you've noticed this while looking back over your own life. The person you were 10 years ago probably viewed the world differently. Your priorities have changed. Your understanding has deepened. Some beliefs have disappeared. Others have become stronger. Experience has quietly reshaped you. Why should that process suddenly stop today? The future still has lessons waiting. New friendships waiting, unexpected opportunities waiting, versions of yourself that you have not yet had the chance to meet. There is something beautifully hopeful about that thought. We spend so much time worrying about who we have been, that we sometimes forget to become curious about who we might still become. Optimism is deeply connected to curiosity. Curiosity asks, what if? What if this conversation changes something? What if this small decision matters more than I realize? What if today's effort becomes tomorrow's turning point? These questions are not naive. They are invitations. Invitations to remain open to possibilities that certainty would prematurely close. Perhaps there is a quiet lesson hidden here. Every meaningful future begins as an uncertain present. No one can see the entire path. No one receives complete guarantees. The people who build fulfilling lives are rarely those who eliminate uncertainty. They are the ones who learn to walk beside it, one thoughtful step at a time, and perhaps that is the quiet courage optimism has been asking of us all along. Not certainty, simply the willingness to begin again. The quiet choice that changes everything. As our journey begins drawing toward its close, one final question quietly emerges. If optimism can be understood, if it can be strengthened, if it grows through attention, action, resilience, gratitude, and the stories we tell ourselves, then where does it truly begin? Does it begin with extraordinary courage, a life-changing opportunity, a fortunate circumstance, or something much smaller? Perhaps the answer is found in an ordinary morning. Imagine two people waking to the sound of the same alarm. Both slept poorly. Both have demanding responsibilities waiting for them. Both carry worries they have not shared with anyone. Neither begins the day feeling especially inspired. Yet before breakfast, each person makes a series of tiny decisions. One immediately reaches for every piece of troubling news they can find. They revisit yesterday's disappointments, replay conversations they wish had gone differently, and begin predicting problems that have not yet arrived. The other does something almost invisible. Before the noise of the day fully takes hold, they pause. They take a slow breath. They notice the sunlight entering through the window. They remember one reason they are grateful to be alive. They remind themselves that while they cannot control every event waiting ahead, they can choose the attitude with which they meet it. Neither life suddenly becomes easier. Traffic still exists. Unexpected emails still arrive. Plans still change. People still disappoint one another. But the second person has done something profoundly important. They have chosen the lens through which they will experience the day before the day chooses it for them. This illustrates one of the most empowering ideas in psychology. While we cannot always control our circumstances, we often have greater influence over our responses than we first imagine. This influence is not unlimited. There are hardships no positive mindset can erase. There are losses no amount of optimism can make painless. There are seasons when surviving one day at a time is itself an extraordinary achievement. Acknowledging these realities is not pessimism. It is honesty. Healthy optimism never asks us to deny suffering. Instead, it quietly reminds us that suffering does not possess the final word. History repeatedly demonstrates this truth. Entire communities have rebuilt after devastating earthquakes. Families have found laughter again after seasons of grief. Individuals have discovered purpose after careers unexpectedly ended. Medical patients have inspired doctors through determination that statistics alone could never predict. Again and again, humanity reveals a remarkable pattern. Not invincibility, renewal. Perhaps renewal is the true language of optimism. Not the belief that life will never break our hearts, but the belief that hearts, though wounded, can continue loving. That dreams, though delayed, can still unfold. That people, though imperfect, can continue growing. That tomorrow, though uncertain, remains unwritten. Maybe there was a time when you believed your own story had reached its most difficult chapter. Perhaps you remember lying awake at night wondering how you would move forward. Perhaps you questioned your abilities. Perhaps you questioned your future. Perhaps you even questioned yourself. Yet here you are, still listening, still learning, still searching, still hoping. Sometimes we overlook the quiet evidence of our own resilience because we become accustomed to carrying it. We rarely congratulate ourselves for surviving ordinary Tuesdays that once felt impossible. We seldom recognize the courage required, simply to keep showing up after disappointment. Yet these moments deserve recognition. They reveal something remarkable. You are far more adaptable than fear allows you to believe. Far more capable of learning than doubt suggests. Far more resilient than yesterday's struggles would have predicted. There is another beautiful truth worth remembering. Optimism is generous. It rarely remains contained within one person. Think about someone whose hope changed your own life. Perhaps it was a parent who believed in you before you believed in yourself. A teacher who saw potential hidden beneath uncertainty. A colleague who encouraged you during a difficult season. A friend who quietly reminded you that better days would eventually arrive. They may never know the full impact of their optimism, yet because they carried hope, they made it easier for someone else to carry hope as well. That is how optimism travels through the world, not through grand speeches, not through perfect lives, but through ordinary people offering calm, encouragement, patience, understanding, and quiet confidence when it is needed most. Every encouraging conversation creates possibilities that cannot be measured. Every act of kindness interrupts someone's invisible battle. Every word of genuine belief becomes a small light placed into another person's future. Perhaps optimism is less about changing the entire world and more about changing one moment, one conversation, one decision, one life, then allowing that life to influence another. As psychologists continue studying happiness, resilience, well-being, and human flourishing, One conclusion appears again and again. Hope is rarely discovered by accident. It is cultivated. Just as a gardener prepares the soil, removes weeds, waters consistently, and patiently waits for growth, we also cultivate optimism through repeated choices. We cultivate it by noticing possibility alongside difficulty, by replacing harsh self-judgment with honest self-reflection, by treating setbacks as teachers rather than permanent verdicts, by surrounding ourselves with people who encourage growth, by taking meaningful action before confidence fully arrives, by remembering that our thoughts deserve examination, not automatic belief, and by refusing to allow one difficult chapter to become the title of our entire story. Perhaps that is the deepest lesson hidden within the psychology of optimism. Optimism is not something we find. It is something we practice, quietly, patiently, one ordinary day after another, until, almost without noticing, we become the kind of person who naturally looks toward tomorrow with curiosity instead of fear. The kind of person who understands that uncertainty is not always an enemy. Sometimes it is simply another name for possibility, and perhaps years from now, when someone asks what changed your life, the answer will not be a single dramatic event. Perhaps it will be much simpler than that. Perhaps you will remember deciding on one completely ordinary day that although you could not predict the future, you could still choose hope. Closing message. As we reach the end of our journey together, take a quiet moment to reflect on where your own story stands today. You may be celebrating a season of progress. You may be standing at the beginning of something new. Or perhaps you're walking through uncertainty, carrying questions that have not yet found their answers. Wherever you are, remember this. Optimism has never asked you to ignore reality. It has never asked you to pretend life is easy. It has never promised a path without obstacles. Instead, it offers something both humbler and far more enduring. The quiet belief that no matter what today has brought, tomorrow still carries possibilities that have not yet revealed themselves. Your past has shaped you, but it does not imprison you. Your mistakes have taught you, but they do not define you. Your fears deserve compassion, but they do not deserve complete authority over your future. Within you is the remarkable human ability to learn, adapt, recover, and begin again. Protect that ability, nurture it, share it generously. Because every hopeful thought you choose, every courageous step you take, and every encouraging word you offer has the power to illuminate not only your own path, but someone else's as well. Thank you for spending this time with me on The Hopeful Narrator. Until our next journey together, may you meet each new day with a calm mind, an open heart, and the quiet confidence that even the smallest light can guide us through the darkest night. And never forget, the future is not something we are merely waiting to discover. It is something we are gently creating, one hopeful thought, one meaningful choice, and one ordinary day at a time.